Hi, this is Perry Marshall, and today I'm going to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
I've been looking forward to bringing this conversation to you for some time. It's Perry Marshall, and we talk primarily about the book Detox, Declutter, Dominate, How to Excel by Elimination. Now, it's the shortest book he's ever written, but as he says, don't let that fool you. There are a lot of valuable insights packed into this book, and there's a lot of valuable insights packed into this conversation. So let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Perry Marshall. Enjoy. Perry Marshall, welcome to the Productivityist Podcast.
I am excited about making people productive, doing the right things instead of just being busy. So glad to be talking to you.
See, and that's the thing, right? I think that when people talk about productivity and time management, they're so into this idea of checking off as many boxes as possible that they don't take the time to figure out whether or not it's the right boxes that they're checking off in the first place. But as we lean into this, and we're going to talk obviously about some of the stuff that we found in this booklet, Detox, Declutter, and Dominate, How to Excel by Elimination. We're going to get into this, but I want to find out from you initially, what made you kind of explore your relationship with time and productivity? Like, what was the thing that kind of made you lean into that a little bit?
Well, if I could rewind to the 90s, when I was a desperately struggling sales guy, somebody said, if you just have more actual sales appointments instead of dialing for dollars and prospecting and all that, you'll sell more, which was, well, it was true, but it wasn't what most of the sales gurus were doing. I mean, this is somebody who was way ahead of the curve on marketing. Well, okay. So I solved that. And I would say, hey, 10 years ago, or certainly 15 years ago, you could get ahead of the pack just by having more little things duct taped together and more little calendar schedules and more like getting things done kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. You could be significantly ahead of the pack. I don't think it even gets you ahead of the pack anymore. Everybody is so efficient and has so many tools at their disposal and so many automation and email blasts and social media and all that everybody's added so much stuff to their pickup truck that the thing is sagging and the shocks, the springs are breaking and they're dragging like all this stuff around. That the elimination mindset is, I also feel like a lot of people are actually willing to listen to this now, where I'm not sure maybe that was true 5 years ago.
Well, and I wonder if it's because minimalism and simplicity have kind of jumped to the fore. But what I always find fascinating is that, and I'm going to be very general here, is that people either go from one extreme to the other. Like they'll go like, I've got to have it all, or like, oh, you know what? Minimalism means getting rid of absolutely everything and going to, which we all know is not the case. It's not black and white. There's shades of gray. And what I liked about this book is it wasn't like you said, get rid of, like, you have these 7 steps. Like it's a practical, tactical, and I'm big on this word lately, sustainable approach, right? And when I started to go through the booklet, and it's what's interesting is it's not a thick booklet, but it's a deep read because you got to think. Like, it's not something that you can just gloss over. When I started to look through this and go through it, I realized that, you were kind of at a point where this had to happen. Like, you had to make this happen. Can you share a little bit about that breaking point for you? Because it literally, the way it reads, it was a breaking or a broken point at that point.
Yes. So I was in the very next room, which has French doors looking into the library, and I was talking on the phone. It was a cold day in February and it was snowing. And I looked through the French doors, and my brother, who's the president of my company, is sitting here where I am right now. And he's looking at me and I'm like, what are you doing here? You live in Nebraska and you showed up unannounced in Chicago. And I'm like, so of course I'm on the phone. I'm like, I have a feeling that him being here probably isn't good.
Unannounced.
I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah. Pretty sure it's a bad omen.
And so I get off the phone, Brian Perry, and this kind of undertakerish voice. He says, "We need to talk." Okay, Brian, what would you like to talk about? We have too many expenses for our cash flow, and we have too many projects going on. I think we could run this business with about 5 or 6 or 8 employees and not 15 or 20. And I think it's time for us to talk about this. Okay. Now he's like made noises about this before, but he seems to be serious this time. And he lays all this out. And I'm like, but Brian, you don't understand. See, okay, here, let me knock some sense into you. See, we got this thing and it's just like ready to go. And it's going to be so awesome. And then and if that weren't enough, we got this other thing. And if that weren't enough, we got this other thing. And like, no, Brian, pat you on the head. Like, you don't understand how awesome all this stuff is. And so we argued about this for probably 8 hours. I mean, I don't know if it was 2 bars and coffee shops and restaurants, or maybe it was 3, but, we kind of bounced around and we went around the mulberry bush and at the end it's like, well, I made a few concessions, but essentially vowed to just redouble my efforts and be a little more organized and push a little harder. 3 months later, it was abundantly obvious, like by May, it was obvious that in February he had been right. Okay, so now we're like 3 months further into a problem. And then, okay, as soon as you get out of denial and start unwinding a problem like this, you find out, well, it's a lot easier to get into things than out of them. And it's a lot easier to hire somebody than to terminate them. And if you lay somebody off, guess what? You still gotta do the severance package and
you're affecting, there's an emotional toll on that too, right?
Oh yeah, I'm even skipping that part. I'm saying, even aside from all of that, it's going to take a while for this ship to right itself, even if we do start throwing stuff overboard. And so the entire summer that year was just misery. Every 3 days we're having another cutting and shopping meeting, and do we really need this? And what if we took this task and consolidated these person's job down to this? And do we really need to be selling this product? Well, after several months of this, by the time the ship did right itself, it's like, man, this thing is so much easier to run without all this extra stuff. Right. And I had solidly gotten into a subtraction and elimination frame of mind. And it's almost like, the 80-20 guy actually took 80-20 seriously for the first time.
You're eating your own dog food. It's interesting. We often teach what we need to learn the most.
Well, of course we do.
Yep.
That's why we teach it, right? It's why we emotionally connect it. It's why we think it's important, right? There's always another degree of your own dog food. And so, and in the midst of this, I started to realize, I am not the only one with this problem. And there's even more dimensions to the problem, because not only are people's businesses loaded up with all this extra stuff, and the pickup truck is sagging with all of the, it looks like a junk collecting truck going down the alley, right? So not only is that, but it's also true just mentally, with your time, with your attention. How many, good grief, how many social media channels can you put up with, let alone keep up with, let alone be current in, let alone be popular in, let alone right?
Yeah.
Like,
It's maintenance over making, right? Like it literally becomes this where you're maintaining so much. And when you ask someone, hey, you know what? Do you want to maintain things? Like, no one really wants to sit back and go, yeah, I love maintaining. Maintaining is my favorite thing to do. But when you get to that level where you can't, and you're right, there's so many people that are like, I fall into that trap. We all do, right? And what I loved is as I went through and we started talking about business renaissance, and I want to get to that, but I want to talk about the first step, because as I read about Renaissance time, I thought this is fascinating, because I think Renaissance time, I want you to explain what it is, how you use it, but I think I incorporate it. But what I love about time is it's very personal and subjective. So what is Renaissance time, and what that seemed to be the key that unlocked a lot of this stuff?
it absolutely is. And this is also the realization that I got to, because Renaissance time is what kept me sane with all of this stuff going on around me in the chaos. So Renaissance time is, well, first, it's the opposite of ring, ring, wake up, 7 o'clock in the morning, pull device into bed, begin death scroll. Okay. This,
Yep.
this is the worst way to start your day. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, okay, it's one thing to like check the temperature. Okay. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about any form of having to react to other people, any form. Okay. I don't care if it's texting, email, social media, CNN, anything. Okay. If the first thing you do in the morning is other people's problems, you're basically screwed for the day.
Yep. Absolutely.
And so what is Renaissance time? I don't do the phone thing. I don't get on my computer. Like, it's so, especially if you work at home, which we've all been working at home this year, it's really easy to drag yourself out of bed in your underwear into the next room and get on the computer. And, before the sleep is wiped out of your eyes, you could already be solving the world's problems, right? No.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Take a shower, cup of coffee, notebook, pen, pencil, possibly, an inspirational book or a spiritual book or something, and be alone with your thoughts, gratitude, prayer, meditation. And you have, I think it should be at least 20 minutes. And if you need to think of it as totally narcissistic, then go ahead and think of it that way.
Sure.
You have total permission. This is your space, your thoughts, your brain, your heart, your soul, your spirit, and everything else is shut out. And you get to think about whatever you want to think about. This is a great time to ask, I call it the head office, some questions. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think I should be focusing on today? And you just let the thoughts come. I free write, like I just get out my notebook and if I had a dream, maybe I write that down. If I had an idea in the shower, last night I had the most wonderful playing checkers with my 7-year-old, whatever it might've been.
Yeah.
Okay. And what do I want to do today? And what is important? And what's the first thing? That is what I call Renaissance time. And that is the starting point, because space in your life starts here. And you cannot think somebody else's thoughts and your thoughts at the same time. It's either yours or theirs. And I cannot stress what a big deal this is. Like, you listen to this and you go, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. No, this is like the most important idea you've heard on a podcast all year.
It's interesting, because as you were saying this, I'm like, Renaissance time, a good part of a balanced breakfast. Like, literally, remember those TV commercials where it's like, but it's so key, because you're right. When you open up email or you start going down that digital path early in the day, anything that you had in mind for that, what you're saying to yourself subconsciously is, what I have in mind for today doesn't matter. It's what everybody else has in mind. And the problem is they don't have, if you want to deliver and you want to take care of others, you have to take care of yourself first. And so many people get that bass backwards. They're like, I gotta get, we hear eat the frog, right? We hear that term, which Brian Tracy, who has been on the show, I absolutely love. Brian Tracy didn't mean do the thing that someone else has given you when it comes to eat that frog.
No,
he didn't mean that at all.
No.
But people confuse it. Now, when we talk about productivity and we talk about efficiency, you alluded to that off the top. This, to me, that Renaissance time, it gives you that balance of intention plus attention. What are my intentions? How am I going to pay attention to it? That's productivity. Everything else after the fact becomes, checking off of the right boxes if you're doing it right. If you're not, and that to me was like, I go for a walk every morning. So that's how I kick off my day. Because number one, it does get the ideas flowing. I make my cup of coffee, and it sounds absolutely crazy to a lot of people that as part of my evening routine, because I do like to start and end my day the same. I think it's a great way to bookend your day. I get my AeroPress coffee ready. I get my shakes. Like I set myself up because I'm a night owl. I have to. I wake up in the morning and I don't have those things ready, it's going to slow me down. So I get up. I now have done this walking habit as of this recording at least 80 days in a row. And so now it's not, it's part of just what I do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the full hour. See, that's the other thing too, is people go, okay, well, I need that hour of power, as Tony Robbins says, or whatever. It can be what you need it to be, but it needs to be something. And that was, as soon as we jumped into that, then all of a sudden we started to get some of these other steps, which we'll get to in a minute. But I wanted to kind of ask you, because so many people struggle with this part, how can you advise the person listening to this right now or watching this right now to get past the bias of, well, I don't have time for that, or, well, what I have in mind doesn't matter because my boss has said such and such, or whatever? How do you break that bias? Because I agree, it's incredibly crucial that they do this.
So think of reacting to other people as a form of addictive behavior. You really literally need to think about that. Like, I think everybody understands that, like, posting a really clever picture on Facebook and getting 100 likes, like, is a dopamine hit. We all kind of
email, getting to inbox zero. Those are little dopamine hits too. Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody gets that. Okay. Yeah. Well, just think of it like especially conscientious people who, they want to do the right thing and they want to be hardworking and they want to be responsible. We're programmed to just react to everybody. Okay, if somebody asks you a question, then you have to answer it. And somebody has a crisis, then you need to help them. Well, that is a cycle that you have to consciously break. And you say, you're going to have to wait until at least 9 o'clock in the morning before I'm going to get to you. Now, for me personally, I don't do email until 11:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Now, it took me a while to get there. I don't think most people could get there, but the world, you can condition the world. Okay, if everybody in your life is conditioned that you will respond to emails in 3 minutes, you have created this, because 98% of all emails do not need a response in 3 minutes and shouldn't get one. And you shouldn't even condition the world to expect that. Okay. Yeah. And then there's another part of it too, which is most people from literally 5 years old are conditioned to just look busy.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Kindergarten, right? Okay, as long as my head down and as long as I'm coloring in my,
it's safe. Well, it's a safe place to be, because you don't get called out either because you're not doing anything or because you're doing too much. It's the nice, safe place to be.
Right. And what this ignores is that very good creative work requires space.
Yes.
It requires space. Albert Einstein had time to think about writing on the ends of a light beam going as fast as, on a train or something. Like, he had time to think about this stuff. And look, like, think of it like there's two kinds of work.
Mm-hmm.
There's work that can be reduced to a set of instructions.
Yes.
Like editing a video. Okay. All right. Open the book, watch the tutorial. Here's how to edit a video. Okay. And then there's stuff that requires originality, thought, resourcefulness. Okay. If whatever you're doing can be reduced to instructions, it's worth about $12 an hour.
Well, and you talk about that in step 3. Absolutely. And what's interesting is, I think what people get stuck on there, Perry, is they make shitty to-do lists. They'll put things like work on video, which tells their brain nothing. But if you, and I've said this to so many people, I'm like, well, you need to break a project down to its smallest particles. And they'll say, well, what does that mean? I'm like, well, it means something different for every single person. When you're first learning to do something, you may need 23 particles, but then you may be able to combine some things. I said, but if you want your brain to know that you've made progress on a video, on a book, or whatever, you might have to say, write 200 words of a video script, not work on video. And then you're right. You'll be able to filter that stuff out. And then one of the biases that shows up when I tell people this, like, yeah, but now my to-do list is just longer. I'm like, no, it's more visible. You're just making these things more visible. And then you can do what you're talking about in step 3, which is to do the stuff only you can do, those high dollar value tasks, and offload some of the smaller ones to people who, that can do that stuff. And then again, the circle continues. Yeah, but that takes time to do that. The time it takes to do that, I could just do those things myself. I'm like, but like you said, the space you need to do those things, you're now filling with the things. It's just this crazy vicious circle, which is where you say, like, busy is safe. Doing that stuff is, because then you're not putting yourself out there, right? You're at the point where you're kind of embracing mediocrity.
Yeah.
So I get amped up about this stuff, as you can tell.
Right. So you have to give yourself permission to not look busy. And, every morning I get out of bed and I come in here and I turn on some music and I get out my notebook, and that will go for me anywhere from an hour to 2 hours. Mm-hmm. Now, I had to build up to that. Like most people, they have no idea what they would do sitting in their chair with their notebook for 2 hours. That's fine.
Yep.
You can do 20 minutes and you need to do 20 minutes. And if you just break the addiction cycle, like every day, I'm just going to start my day 20 minutes later. I'm not even telling you to get out of bed earlier. I'm just telling you start everything later, because the time you have to sort yourself out in the beginning it will set you up to be so much better. And it also feeds your inner energy. So, I talked about, well, look, if it can't be reduced to a set of instructions and it's original problem solving, you need creative juice to do that. And when you do Renaissance time, you're actually feeding the creative juice, and you find yourself like, wow, I was on that phone call. I couldn't believe what came out of my mouth. It was the most perfect thing I could ever said. I didn't even know why or how I knew to say that. It was because your creative reserves were not running on empty. Mm-hmm. Like, you got a lot of resources. And CNN chews up that CPU time, right? And Twitter chews up that CPU time. And like all this busyness chews up all that. Like, you've got the most incredible search engine, like 1,000 times better than Google ever created. And it's in your subconscious mind, but it's only going to work on whatever you feed it.
It's fascinating, because I think that another thing that pops up, and I love that time, because it doesn't necessarily mean I do anything with those things at that time.
No.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they're just, okay, I have this great, I'm going to let that sit. I have it. I've captured it. This is a big thing too. Get it out of your head. Like you said, the notebook thing, there's something kinesthetic about writing it down. Absolutely. Get it out of your head. And then if it needs to sit there, it can sit there. I was just talking to a couple of friends before we hopped on this call about Hemingway. The Hemingway documentary just came out. And I was reading in Stephen Kotler's book, The Art of Impossible, where Hemingway would sometimes just finish his writing session mid-sentence. Like he wouldn't even finish a thought. And it was like, look, this is my time's done. And I want to see if it became kind of a game to a degree for him too. Like, I wonder if I could pick up where I left off. But it's interesting because I think a lot of people say, well, if I can't finish it now, what's the point of getting it out of here? I want to do it all in one session. Just like you said, well, you take 2 hours now. You didn't start with 2 hours. You started with, like you said, you start with 20 minutes. You start with, whatever you feel that you can start with. And then once that gets too comfortable, I would imagine, then stretch it and then stretch it and stretch it until you figure out where the boundaries have to be. Mm-hmm. Right. Same thing with email. Same thing with all these other things. Same thing with the product stuff that you talk about too, because you talk about like building the Starbucks thing, which I want to touch on, which I've not heard that metaphor before. I've heard, of course, the milkshake problem, right? What job does the milkshake do and things like that. I don't know if you ever heard that. Clayton Christensen talking about jobs to be done. The idea of what job does the milkshake do. It's really fascinating. I'll link to the talk in the show notes and in the description. But the idea of a milkshake isn't just a milkshake; it has a job to do. Like it replaces a coffee because it would be where the coffee would be. But you talk about like, okay, Starbucks has coffee, but then there's more to it than that, and we need to think about businesses and our offerings that way. Can you expand upon that a bit?
So, the 80-20 principle says that 80% of the money is going to come from 20% of the customers. And 80% of the money is going to come from 20% of the 20% of the customers, and what that means is if you have customers at all, a few of them want to give you a whole lot more money than everybody else does. And so it's almost a law of physics. If you have a Starbucks and 1,000 people come every week and buy a $5 latte, the 80-20 principle says one of those people will buy a $2,700 espresso machine, pretty much guaranteed. I mean, if it's a good value and it looks good and it's pretty, 1 out of 1,000 will buy it. And so you sold $5,000 of lattes and you're going to sell $2,700 of espresso machine. And if you have a $300 espresso machine, you'll sell several of those too. And so I call it the principle of the $2,700 espresso machine. And what a lot of people don't realize about the economics of business is the lattes only keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And there probably isn't even any profit to be had in a business that only sells lattes.
Yep.
It's probably the case that the entire business, you could think of it, exists to sell an espresso machine every week.
Right. Convenience stores are like that too. They use like cigarettes and things like that. They'll sell them at either a loss leader or just at cost. But when they're in there to buy those things, not advocating buying cigarettes, of course, we're using this as an example, right, is, I'm going to buy a soda or I'm going to buy chips. And the markup on those are much greater because you're already in there. So now all of a sudden that's what they're making the money on. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
That's right. And so the easiest way especially for a small business or a freelancer to make more money is to simply add an espresso machine. Okay, I've got these 10 clients. They each pay me $1,000 a month. Well, invent an espresso machine that's $10,000 and one of them will buy it. Like if it's commensurate value to what you were selling for $1,000, it's almost guaranteed that they'll buy it. And if they don't, it just means there's something about the offer that's not quite right.
Yeah.
Because they have the itch and they want to scratch it and they have the money and they're going to spend it with somebody. And if they don't spend, so, not only is there a $2,700 espresso machine, there might be a $10,000 barista cruise in the Mediterranean where,
right,
everybody drinks coffee all week and vibrates,
Right. But there could also be the kettle that fits in between the two too, right? Like the special pour over. I mean, I'm a coffee snob. So the guy that would buy like the pour over kettle and that's or the higher end beans that you would grind to go home and make it yourself. So right. But this is where I think it's fascinating because as I was reading the book, I'm sitting out on my back deck, reading the book, having a cup of coffee. And when I got to that part, because I sell I have products that I sell, And I'm at a point now where there's the elimination process, and we're going to touch on that in a second. But something came up during one of my, I do this free challenge, and it's a fairly new challenge that I do. And someone said that this one thing that I brought up in the challenge was game changing. And I took a note of it, and I didn't do it. So that was Renaissance stuff. Like, that was like, okay, remember what this person said. And then while I was reading this part of the booklet of Detox, Declutter, and Dominate, I thought, that's my espresso machine, because it's, number one, I could do that thing. Number two, it's simple. The thing that they said, the thing I did was very simple, and it had a massive impact on them. And I'm like, that person would pay for that. Like, that person would pay for just that. So if I can make this simple product scale, and you talk about this, I believe, what step is that? That's step 4, right? Create an irresistible product that's a joy to use by simplifying, right? It's either, what was the concept again? I'm going to look real quick. It was make it cheaper to make or a joy to use, right? Yes. Cheaper to make or a joy to use. Well, the cheaper to make was already done. Like, you can't do both. And you talk about this in the book, but I thought this is a thing. Now I'm going to ask you, I already have a bunch of stuff. I have some stuff that's doing okay. I have some stuff that's not doing okay. And others are probably in the same boat.
Yeah.
How do you decide when you come up with that espresso machine idea? You're like, oh, I've got a full menu. What do I cut? Like, how do you make that decision with the idea? Like, because I know this thing will work, and I know I can dive into it, but I'm like, something's got to give. Yes. So how do you make that call?
So we've got a friend named Len Bertain. He has this thing called the 20-120 rule. And it goes like this. 20% of what you sell produced 120% of last year's profits. Like, the best 20%, the most profitable 20%. And then the bottom 20% of what you sell pulled the 120 down to 100, which was what you actually made. In other words, last year, you lost money on 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% of what you sold. If you're shipping stuff out, 10% of those boxes, you taped dollar bills to the boxes.
This is true. Yes.
And you either didn't know it or didn't admit it to yourself. And you lose money every time you sell that thing.
Yep.
Now, if you want to be really thorough about this, you have your accountant do a cost accounting. And like, you go to your CPA and you go, I want you to figure out how much actual profit we make on every one of these products. And he'll do surgery for 2 months and he'll give you an answer. Mm-hmm. And that can take a while. But you know what? You already know right now one thing that you're taping dollar bills to, and you're not being honest to yourself. And you need to just either discontinue it, or if you can't bring yourself to do that, just double the price.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, yeah, I know that used to be $159. Now it's $299. They're like, why? Well, because our accountant said that we were losing money on it. And they're like, that's the end of the conversation. If they want to buy it, they buy it. If they don't want to buy it, they don't buy it. Right? Or you just like stop. Like, so you realize you got to think about what this means. It means that you can sell 90% as much stuff and spend only 90% of the time. You can reduce your activity by 10% and make 10% more money at the same time by doing nothing. And all you have to do is say no, or like delete something off your website so it's not there anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, really, and this applies to everything. Like, this applies to, there's appointments that you have every week that are a waste of time. There are employees you have that cost you more money than you pay them. I guarantee you, this is true. If you have more than about 4 or 5 employees, I guarantee you one of them is dragging the ship down. So that's how you do it.
As we get close to wrapping up, if someone wants to embrace the new Renaissance, which is what you talk about here, I mean, other than picking up the booklet, which we're definitely going to link to in the show notes and in the description here, what's the first simple action that they can take to head down that path, because I think people they want some clarity around it, obviously. But they don't want to be overwhelmed at the same time, because they're going to have a lot of conflicting thoughts going on up here, because again, we're used to productivity equals more. What do you mean less? So if you could dive into that for a little bit as we get close to the end.
Okay. So if you're going to make a first step, the first step is tomorrow when you wake up, like if you got to check in with your spouse or your friend or whatever, you tell them. So I'm just checking in with you. When I get up, I'm not getting on my phone. I'm not going to get my email. I'm going to get my tea or coffee, and I'm going to spend 20 minutes. And I don't really care if you sit on a park bench or go for a walk or write in your notebook or read your Bible or whatever, but you're going to have space to think about, all right, what can I stop doing? There is nobody that can't stop doing 20 minutes of something.
Mm-hmm.
There's nobody who shouldn't be stopping 20 minutes of something. Richard Koch said something very profound in his 80-20 book. He said, life is not short. Life is long. There is not a lack of time. We are awash with time. If you think about, if the average person lives 70 years, you realize 70 years is a long time.
Mm-hmm. And yet we live in this world where people are like, live for today because tomorrow's not guaranteed. And then because they want to cram their days with so much stuff, it's often the wrong stuff.
Right. And it makes time just fritter away. So I'm curious, do you have a bucket list? Like,
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and I'm pretty good with structuring my time too. I mean, I gotta walk the talk. But then again, I mean, it's interesting because I do get caught up in the, oh my goodness, I got to get all this stuff done today because, live for today because tomorrow. But then you're like, well, wait a minute, you're never going to get it all done. You're never going to get it all done. So you might as well do the things you really, really want to do. Those things that are going to fill your cup, right?
Well, exactly. And I insist that everybody who actually has a written down bucket list can probably do at least one of those things in the next month just by deciding to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, I'm not even talking about bike riding through Mongolia or visiting the Eiffel Tower. I'm just talking about like something.
Yep.
Like, and like, so, okay. So why is responding to this psychotic person's email or Facebook post more important than you going on a camping trip with your son, which you promised him 2 years ago? Right.
Like, well, and further to that, why is even opening up the email, knowing full well that's what's waiting for you? Like, right. It's Pandora's box, right? Yeah, look at that bucket list first before you look at the other thing. And in your case, look at the notebook first, right? Like, I've got a fountain pen right here. I'm definitely big on analog tools and notebooks. I use Bear and Fig products all over the place. I mean, I love my notebooks. And the fact of the matter is, if I look at that stuff first, I'm going to be in far better position than if I open up email first or social media or whatever, right?
That's right. And so just start there, 20 minutes. You may need to have a conversation with your spouse who might, without even thinking about it, maybe they think you need to look busy, and you just say, well, this is what I'm doing.
No, my wife and I've had this discussion before. We've been married for 17 years now, so she knows how I operate. But what's that old story about, like, this writer would get up in the morning and look out the window, and his wife would go to work, and then when she'd come home, he'd still be looking at the window, and so on and so forth. This happened for like 3 days in a row, and I'm paraphrasing the story. And then finally on the third day, she says, what do you do? Like, you've been looking at the window every time I leave, and every time I come home, you're looking at the window. She goes, what are you doing? He goes, I'm writing.
Yes.
And so it's, yes. I mean, I tell you, I read your book sitting on my deck with a coffee, and I just finished getting off a mastermind with a couple of my good friends, and we talked about guilt. And one of those things that does pop up, like, who am I to sit here doing this? I'm like, no, this is exactly what I've designed my life for, to be able to do this stuff. And people get caught up in the, well, no, I'm expected to do this. I'm expected to check email first thing in the morning. I'm expected to check in.
I love the way you said it. I'm expected to. It's a passive sentence. It doesn't refer to any particular person. It's like, okay, wait a minute. So first of all, let's talk about the important people in your life.
Yeah.
Okay. My wife expects me to, well, y'all, everybody knows what that list is.
Yeah.
My kids expect me to, everybody know, my clients expect me to. So where does that preclude you reading a book on your back deck?
Yeah.
Hello, right? And yes, you're exactly right. Guilt. And most of us feel guilty about the things that feed our energy. And so there's another part of Renaissance time that I talk about in the book that we don't have time for, other than just to say that the things you must feel most guilty about, and I don't mean having an affair or anything like that.
No.
Like these innocent,
the good things, the noble, the moral things. Yeah.
Right. The good guilt things. These are actually the things that do feed your creativity and do feed your spirit and do recharge you and make you a fascinating conversationalist, able to be resourceful and solve problems, be good with your clients. If you're a speaker, it makes you a better speaker. If you're an inventor, a software program, it has you writing better software. This is so important. And the fact that you feel guilt is probably the indication that you should be doing it.
Yeah. It's funny because one of the things I've personally wanted to do over the past year, especially now that the podcast has been doing quite well over the years, is I'm like, I don't want to be the guy that says, yeah, so I got your book and I read the little insert that comes with it and tells me what questions to ask. Like, there's nothing that I love more than when I open a book and I can say to someone, I can quote them from part of the book that's in the middle, and they're like, oh, you read it. Like, you read the book.
Oh, yeah.
That to me is critically important, because then I can have those conversations, and that goes beyond just the episode. Like, you can have a great relationship with a person beyond that. You can forge and foster better relationships. And plus, you'll learn something along the way. If I didn't read your book, which was by far one of the easier ones to read in terms of length of time,
right,
but depth for sure was there. I was like, if I didn't read that, that wouldn't have come to mind. That simple, you never know. And that's why I talked to AD Pinar, AD Rockstar, who's WooCommerce. He wrote a book called Life Profitability. I read his book. It prompted me to pick up When Breath Becomes Air, which I had not read before, which is, and all these things that are in there. I'm like, I would not have gotten those gifts if I didn't take the time to do it. And it's part of, there's a joy to that, right? It's the same thing with I think it's also important to note during all of this that, yes, that Hemingway documentary is being recorded right now. I'm not going to sit down and watch it until I can give it my full attention, because I don't want to say, hey, hold on, son. I know you want to play Transformers right now or do Nerf War, but the Hemingway documentary's on and I want to watch it. It's on the PVR. I could watch it anytime. See, that's the other thing too, is I think with the exception of sports, which I also think you can do this for, if you have the willpower, is you don't have to watch things as they appear on the television screen. I mean, sports becomes trickier for some people if you have a propensity to go on social media and look. Yeah. But I certainly don't. That's something I'm trying to work on. But yeah, I mean, last question. You must journal. Other than the note taking, you must journal.
I've got stacks of journals.
Yeah. Evening, is it part of your shutdown routine, or is it
it's the morning. It's the morning. Okay. And look, 50% of it is gibberish.
Yeah.
Same. But you know what? Like 10% of it is pure gold. Some of my very best ideas, inspirations, like, let's approach it from that angle, or why don't you call this person? For me, journaling is like, it's like a prayer channel, and like, this is just how I tune in. Yeah. And
there's a divinity to it.
Mm-hmm. And it's the most valuable thing I do. It is.
I would say that, and I will this is one of the hills I'll die on. I'm like, journaling matters. Like it's it's an undervalued and misunderstood tool for productivity and time. Right. There's this there's this Kickstarter project I'm backing, and it's Douglas Adams, the author, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Mm-hmm. They just released it. It's the Kickstarter campaign starts. It's called 42, and it's all of 60. Yeah, you get the joke. You get the reference. It's 60 banker's boxes, I believe, of his journals, ideas, thoughts, and they've condensed them into this book that they're doing a Kickstarter. And I'm like, done. Because he was the guy that kind of inspired me to start writing in the first place. I'm like, you know what? This is a no-brainer. I'm going to back this thing, and I can't wait to dig into the work that he has, because again, during Renaissance time, often when I'm reading something that has nothing to do with productivity or time management, I can connect those dots. Like, oh, this is a story I can tell, oh, I like watching the Royal Rumble as part of pro wrestling. Oh, it's a 2-minute entry between each wrestler, but it's not really 2 minutes. It's just there to create a framing for the story. I know 2 minutes doesn't feel like 2 minutes. I can write about that, and I can use this as a metaphor. You don't get those connections unless you like you said, you give yourself the space. And John Cleese has said that the things you need for great creative work are time and space. If you don't give yourself those, ain't going to happen.
That's right. Totally.
Harry, where can people pick up the book? Where can people keep up with you and your work? This has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you.
Book, Amazon, Detox, Declutter, Dominate, 36 pages. It's about $9 US. And it is the most dense, like there is not a wasted word in this book.
No.
If you want to get a piece of Perry Marshall, go to perrymarshall.com, scroll down. There's a email sign up called the 30-Day Street MBA. Will punch you in the face from the very first message. So,
awesome. Hey, Perry, thank you so much for taking the time today to join me on the Productivityist podcast.
Thank you, Mike. Great being on.
Big thanks to Perry Marshall for joining me on the program today. If you want to check out all the show notes and everything related to what we talked about, just head to productivityist.com/podcast 390. You'll get all the show notes. You'll be able to get the book, everything right from there. And by the way, if you don't want to miss a single episode of the podcast, you can just click on the subscribe button in the app that you're using to listen to this podcast right now. The show notes are there too, but if you don't want to miss a single episode, including the next episode featuring Lisa Erickson, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Plus, it makes it easier for you to find past episodes as well with great guests. We're at 390 episodes so far, and we have no signs of slowing down. Actually, as of this recording, a little inside track for you. We have recordings either done or ready to go. In other words, we've got interviews booked all the way until early 2022. So we're ready to go. I hope you are too. So again, hit that subscribe button. And by the way, leave a rating and review as well. That way we can know how you like the show, what we can do to improve and make the show better. That's it for today. Thanks for joining me on A Productive Conversation. And for A Productive Conversation, it's me, Mike Vardy. And until next time, remember to stop doing productive and start being productive. See you later.